I want to revisit an idea that I mentioned in the last video, and that is GOBOs. Because I think they're a great way to add variety to your lighting setups. They can even help simulate styles of natural light like we just saw in the last video. And just overall, they can help create more interest in your photos. So that is what I'm going to be looking into today. Roll the intro. There's no intro. So if you don't know what GOBOs are, it stands for Go Between Object, and they're objects that typically go between the light source and the subject and ends up creating some sort of shadow pattern on the set. And if you use it properly, and I'll explain in a bit what I mean by properly, you can end up again with something much more interesting than if you didn't shoot with one at all. So in its most basic form, a GOBO can simply be just two foam boards flagging off both sides of, let's say, a window or a softbox. So I know I was shooting with a strip box already, but notice how the two foam boards created a GOBO in the shape of a strip box, and therefore allowed me to focus the light more on the bowl of lemons. And I know it's not the most flattering type of light for this scene, but my point is that GOBOs can be as simple as flagging off light from certain parts of the frame. But the really interesting part about GOBOs is that a GOBO can be essentially any pattern you can think of. And depending on the object you use will determine how you ultimately shape the light. So this is the GOBO that I already had cut out, but I'm just gonna show you how I cut it. I used this guy. This is a razor. Push this open and the razor comes out. I don't know if you can see it, it's blurry. Oh well, it's a razor. So all I'm gonna do is I'm just going to cut a piece out in a way where it's shaped like one of these little holes. There. So if you cut it good enough right there, and then you push it open, and there. What I was making is kind of an imitation of what is known as a cucullorus, or a cookie. You may have already seen these types of GOBOs used in the film industry or even filmmaking YouTube videos. And what this essentially does to light is it simulates dappled lighting. It's the type of light you see coming through trees or a window curtain. Anything really that has texture to it and ends up creating shadow patterns, which sometimes can create more interest in a photo. Notice how the shape of the GOBO created the shadows. It gave it more shadow and texture, which ultimately made it more interesting to look at, in my opinion, than the first example with no GOBO. Of course, GOBOs aren't limited to just these two tools. There are so many ways a GOBO can be utilized. It's just a matter of your creativity and willingness to experiment. But before you basically try anything, there are a few things to keep in mind when trying them out. Number one is that the distance of your GOBO will affect the quality of your shadows. So the farther away the GOBO is from the subject, the softer the shadows will be. And the closer they are, vice versa, the more defined the shadows will be. So that will be up to you. Number two is that the size of your light source will also affect how the shadows come out. If your light is a small point source, it will be easier for the GOBO to create really defined shadows, while on the other hand, if your light source is a large softbox, for example, it will be much more difficult to find shadow definition from your GOBO. For number 3, to really help the gobo look more convincing, make sure to also experiment with a base layer light, which is just another light that fills in the shadows. You can do this either with a fill card or another flash. In some cases, your one key light could just bounce off the walls surrounding your set if you're shooting in a smaller space, and simultaneously create that fill light layer automatically. And number 4 is to be careful that your gobo does not distract from your subject, especially if you're doing food photography. So if the shadows are too harsh or dappled or not properly spotlighting your subject, this could overall end up looking messy and distract the eyes from the subject ultimately, which we don't want. So again, just make sure to experiment, looking for ways to highlight the subject with the gobo while creating more interest in the lighting. Make sense? All right, well, I hope in some way you found that helpful. Press that like button if you did, and please subscribe to this channel if you aren't already. And as always, I hope you're holding up well, I hope you're healthy, and I hope you're safe. And thank you again for taking the time to watch this video, and I'll talk to you next time.